Hi everyone. Hi
Hi,
Rahemur. Salam alaikum.
alaikum salam. How are you? Ramadan Mubarak.
Yeah, iyi Ramazanlar. Right, we get that out of the way. I'm not fasting, obviously.
Neither
Um,
am
are you? No.
I.
Okay. Very difficult, I think, for people in the without the Ramazan meal, the iftar at the end of the day. I would imagine it's very difficult to not have that sense of community. Zoom iftar as well as Zoom everything else. So if I could ask Jodi, Rahemur and Patrick to keep themselves unmuted and keep your video on, and if everybody else could just mute. And Leanne, who is here and is muted, who obviously was the person that I organised the event at the V&A with, is here. I know she's on a furlough, so if you could just let us in DM know whether or not you're allowed to speak or be visible or whatever, we'd love to welcome you on, but I do understand that the furloughing rules are quite strict, so if that's not possible, I completely understand, and I hope I'm not speaking for you. Thank you everyone for coming. In the normal world, this is half term weekend and we're all like, yeah, we've got a week off with the kids at home. And now it's like, oh, we've got a week off with the kids at home. And,
or is it a weekend?
And not only that, 5 minutes before, as I was saying to Patrick, the boy from next door, who we've been co-isolating with through all the ever-changing rules, came through with a thorn in his foot, and out came the Dettol, because I have so much Dettol around the house now that obviously I swabbed him with it. There's someone else in waiting, Maria. So I think this is going to be quite a nice chat. We had some quite big events, and sometimes that can be a bit overwhelming when you're chairing, because you can't see everyone, you can't feel the room, you can't gauge everybody. Actually this conversation is really pertinent to what we were talking to our funding guy about earlier, and he hit the nail on the head, with which he's very succinct with all the words that I use: social mobility, which is really part of my story and isn't really happening. Well, it's definitely in reverse at the moment. And each of you who are speaking, and many in the room, are a part of that conversation, because we have, through hook, crook, educations, the smarts, whatever it is, managed to find ways to more realise our potential than certain people for whom that's not possible. And Global Britain Local Stories was an event that we took to the V&A last year with Leanne, who's here. Through the education department, bringing the APPG, which is the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Textiles and Fashion, in. And we brought designers from different backgrounds into conversation. It was quite daunting, because we had Dr. Tristan Hunt, and we had the Deputy Speaker, and we would have had, as is the way with Parliament, more MPs, but there was a 3-line whip, which means you can't leave the room on a Brexit vote. Brexit, obviously, through the lens of COVID, feels quite distant, but I would add, if we're going into a conversation about Global Britain Local Stories, it's not going anywhere. There are arguments that COVID-19 will mask the impacts of Brexit, and it's something I think you should all be alert to, and certainly we at Fashion Roundtable are, in terms of shifting narratives, as well as shifting economics. The strategy, recommendations from the government on visas still don't allow garment workers under the current rules to come in from the EU post-November. So definitely that will hugely impact the work we're doing on onshoring. If I could just ask everybody to introduce. So to me, I've got Patrick, Rahemur, and then Jodi. So if I could start with Patrick in the yellow room, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tamara. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining. So yeah, my name's Patrick Scally. I work for a company called the Trampery, specifically the Trampery Fish Island Village, which is kind of our biggest commitment to the fashion industry in England through our kind of space development and business support programs. So it's currently just opened the first 7 studios, but we're going to have 64 overall, so 50,000 square feet of space to support the fashion industry, alongside another project which one of the fellow speakers is a part of, which is the Trampery Popular Works. So yeah,
Thank you, Patrick. Right,
like Patrick was saying, so I'm part of the new lot of designers who are taking over popular work through CFE. I'm a fashion designer. I work predominantly with sustainable textiles and natural dye, but also with youth centres and youth clubs within London to, like the word Tamara used, is for social mobility, just to kind of give them access points into higher education, but incorporating that within like fashion design and showcasing. Yeah, and I'm also an academic in teaching.
And where are you from originally? Because I think that's really important to say in terms of access as well, because it's not dissimilar to where I'm from, but more well known probably.
So I'm from the East End and from the Bangladeshi British community in East London. I grew up there, and I'm very much connected to it. But it's just a very distant world from the world I'm in right now, which is the fashion industry. And it has taken me a long time to kind of evaluate the two and kind of see where the crossovers are, and actually learning that I was never taught about the crossovers, and then you kind of find yourself learning about them yourself. But that for me has been really interesting to see what being British and what being Bangladeshi means in fashion, and how actually historically they've always intertwined. Not always in a good way, but they have just historically always intertwined, and it just hasn't been part of the narrative.
Yeah, when you look at those Jane Austen, very English novels, which are quite often on Sunday evenings, and you see the paisley and the colours, it's obviously because of the empire, the impacts of the Raj, which at that time had Bangladesh imparted, because India then was 3 times what India is now. So, yeah, thank you. And Jodi, who's come all the way from South London via Newcastle. I loved how Cordelia put in our post that she managed to get in South Oxley, which is the estate that I grew up on. In South Oxley, it's called South Oxley, but I didn't quite get it right when I tried to type it. And Jodi has corrected that it's not Newcastle. It's, where are you from, babe?
Newcastle.
Not New. Yes. Glass.
Yeah, Newcastle. Yeah. Yeah, Newcastle, Sag Hill. First person to go to uni in my family. Still have my university debt hanging there, which is nice to know about. And my kind of what's relative to this story, I guess, is that my grandma was a worker in the mills when she was very young over in Yorkshire during the war. My mum can sew really well, and she also later in life had a haberdashery shop and knitting shop, and kind of my family are from, actually, we used to have a soft drinks factory, so I'm kind of quite ingrained in that factory, not factory life, because I've obviously, well, I have worked in one actually in Mauritius for 6 months. But yeah, that's kind of what's relevant to this global Britain, local, kind of like how you piece together who you are, where you're from, what that means. As you can tell now, I don't really have a northern accent, and the reason why is because I felt that I couldn't get on in the fashion industry, to be quite honest, if I had the accent that I had when I left, because when I was on the phone in the fashion cupboards and all that sort of stuff, it just didn't work, just didn't work.
And how did that feel, letting that skin go?
It doesn't go, you just mask it, so it's kind of different, and depending on who you're talking to, you talk to them in a different way, right? Which is probably why I'm quite interested in communications and how things come out vocally. Yeah, and it's just, for me, it's not, obviously, because I'm white British, my thing's more around class and kind of like what that looks like in today's fashion landscape. Yesterday on the webinar that we had with Black Neon, it was quite interesting that Mira, who is Pia's daughter, looked at a pile of Vogues, and she was like, "Mummy, this is just a book of ads, you know?" And I was like, that's quite interesting to think about that in the context of what we aspired to, like maybe it's 20 years ago. So yeah, class divide.
I know, I mean, the whole thing around accents was interesting during the Labour Party candidacy, that everybody was espousing how working class they were. It became part of the conversation. And Emily Thornberry, who has a really what's called RP, received pronunciation, is essentially from a single parent and had grown up on an estate, but had ended up so ingrained with having to mask that to get on, especially going into the Thatcher years. And I recognise that, because I think we were taught RP at the grammar school I went to, and I remember being there and thinking, because even from South Oxley to Watford, there was a difference in the accent, because it was full of people who'd been bombed out and dropped into this estate. So it had essentially an East End accent. There was different tonality to it, which is probably lost now from a Watford accent, which is more, it's not even estuary, it's suburban London. And I realised I'm called Tamara Cincik. Okay, I need to try to take this on. But inevitably, when I've lost my temper or I'm tired, or I speak to someone from home, it comes on, because it's inevitable. If I could just ask Emma if you could just put your mute on, that would be really helpful. Thank you so much.
I think it's, sorry, I was just going to say, I think as well,
a huge issue.
People. I've been trying to like work out what I am, as in like, am I working class? Am I middle class? Am I this? What's the social mobility in that? Like, because actually, you know, as a factory owner, historically, what does that mean? As a worker, like, where's that? You know, it's quite hard to unpack sometimes.
Yeah, I've got sociology A level, and from my understanding, it's what you're born into, and that might have shifted as well because it's a generation ago, as well as what you go into. And also the grading, which is something we at Fashion Roundtable have been looking at a lot, have job descriptions. And it's something we actually brought up with government today about job descriptions that they're looking at to give support to during COVID. And there's a woman who's written into us, and she's got a rental service for baby bundles, and she's not getting any support. And their argument was, well, it doesn't fit this job description. And Maria brilliantly went back to them and said, but you know, you've got to fit where the market's going, not just what fits the criteria. And actually, when you look at ABC1, which were the old ways of saying upper, middle, blah blah blah, down to CDE, it's just not fit for purpose, because nobody's really working down mines anymore. I'm sure where you grew up, I'm sure the mines are gone, or in the shipbuilding of the northeast. So jobs have shifted, which inevitably brought people to urbanised areas, which is why I think what Patrick's doing is really important. And the Isle of Dogs, where Rahemur's from, will have changed massively from what it was 50 years ago, when it was part of, you know, the tail end of the empire, and all the people who worked in all the factories and in the shipping down there. Patrick, when you look at the constituency of who's coming into the Trampery and what you're trying to attract, how are you navigating that to try and ensure a sense of opening up opportunity? And what have you got criteria, or how do you benchmark it?
You do. I mean, it's interesting. I think we're kind of lucky in the sense that from a kind of moral standpoint, for the 10 years we've existed, it's the kind of social enterprise nature of our work as a space provider it does draw you know, people who have got more kind of care and principle, or a kind of grander objective than just making to us, which makes it much easier for us to you know, occupy and build community with like-minded souls. But at the same time, you know, as we've kind of hit a little bit of a growth period recently, we're not you know, we are kind of more sustainable versus infinite growth, absolutely. But over this kind of recent patch of time, you know, especially with Hackney Wick Fish Island, the kind of Lee Valley has been the concentration for us. It was previously Shoreditch, but we all know what happened to the prices around there, or London Fields. We also don't know what the prices happen like around there. So the focus has been kind of going all the way north to Tottenham, down to Republic, which is an East India dock. And I guess the difficulty is always, you know, putting our own, you know, lens and our own microscope on what local means. Whenever we create a space, there's always a cap in our mind of, or sorry, not a cap, a minimum of what we say local creatives who are going to be inside of the space. And that usually sits around kind of 70 to 80% is the desired kind of number. But as we're well versed, you know, Hackney Wick is the topography of that land has changed drastically from the kind of Lammas land liaison fair of, say, 20 years ago, with the arts community that really kind of made this place what it is. So to be kind of mindful of that and know that the new neighbourhood isn't historical, but it also can have a really informative and kind of vital give back to the area. And through kind of working on spaces which are so visible, so Fish Island Village being, you know, part of it's a new development, but it's you know, it's massive glass frontages, it's very visible, there's no gate. It's about kind of trying to create for the kids of that area who don't see themselves in the spaces that are being made. We don't have to tell them that. They'll be able to look inside and see that it is a space for them. And that's kind of the the harder part of the work. It makes it not so easy on yourself, but it's the vital part and it's the necessary part. But yeah, I think in terms of the diversity of our communities, certainly with Fish Island Village, it's a real mix of ethnicities as well as, female foundership. And obviously we had, for 7 studios, we had something like, I think it was 150 specific applicants for those 7 studios. So the criteria it's easy to be quite careful and considered when you've got that many people interested. And it just means that we can make sure that we're not just marking each other's homework, we're really putting ourselves to the coalface and saying, like, is this brand going to get the most out of it? Are they going to give the most back? Are they going to share in a way that's going to give something to this local community that's been here before and will show up soon? So but again, the neighborhoods that we operate in are so different. So Tottenham, it's not the same as Hackney Wick, and that's why there's no Trampery hyphen Tottenham, or it's one thing, and we're not trying to make Tottenham more Trampery. We're just trying to support an ecosystem, not just the businesses, but also the local residents, and hopefully for the whole of society.
And what's personally interesting to me is, so my mum's from further out from Tottenham.
Okay.
So she grew up in Ponders End, which is part of Enfield, and that's actually where, for me, as growing up in the suburbs, is where the meeting point really of Londoners who've been pushed out economically. Now you'll have your key workers who are having to live way out in Zone 6 economically, and in a way, these areas, I lived in Hackney when I was at UCL. I go around it, it looks the same, but it's very different. When you look at the buildings, I'm like, okay, it's still the same, but the constituency of the community's vastly changed. How do you engage actually with where those people got pushed to, which are those Ponders Ends, are those, South Oxleys, are those people who are kind of still lagging behind? How do we look to the people like Rahemur who are doing that work with youth clubs, because youth clubs obviously have been heavily hit by austerity and are closed in vast numbers? How do we get that connection so that they can get to the point to get to you?
I think it's a really vital point. And I remember speaking to the folks at the Bartlett at UCL, who are neighbouring us in here east with the Trampery on the Gantry. And, they really, they levelled it to us going like, does this model just feed off of like the London creative ecosystem? Like, could you do this model I'm from a small town in the East Midlands. Like, if I gave you 50,000 square feet, could you make this work? And I certainly think moralistically, yes, but the size would be different. And I know that there's different communities there that need to be spoken to in different ways and addressed and brought in. So I think for us, it's especially in the beginning phases, because we don't take big leases on spaces, so we're not kind of weighed down by those decisions. We very much allow ourselves to be in a position to be more nimble, and I think that's why, certainly looking at the youth centre model again, like what Rahman was doing, and I think it deserves a lot of attention. And I think for us, it's big focus for me is around primary, secondary education of textiles. I mean, where I grew up, it's my little niece and nephew go to the same primary school I went to in Horncastle. They can't sew. Yeah, or they put it on a pillow and don't care. But then they'll see me on Instagram and see Rahman's designs and be like, oh my God, that's amazing. Like, I want to wear that. And you go, okay, cool. I just got to get those 2 people in the same. I've got to get kids in those studios to see what it takes, again, to really to re-educate on what textiles design and on the principles of how fabrics are obtained and all these things. But it be a kind of creative exploration versus a chore. And I think that's what our space is, having that visibility, having those kind of dialogues happening from primary all the way up to further education, I think is how we try to reach out into as diverse a group, because I think when you make that change to young children, the ripples go on for life, really. So that's what really excites me about
No, I have to say to any parent here who's homeschooling, it's been an eye-opener at what they're being taught. My son basically issued a revolt. He's just turned 9 this week, when he said, Mummy, I've done weeks of maths. I want to do some art. I've got my A's, Mummy. I need to do some art. And I was like, you know what? He's got to do some art. He was much happier. He was calmer. He wasn't checking the time every 5 minutes. He was following something digitally to try to copy, a drawing of a kind of for I guess for an animated game, but he was really engaged with it. And that's why I'm very passionate about STEAM education, because I'm really worried about the fact that they can't, how are they going to get in? Also, just before I move on to Rahemur, have you looked at Darren Rodwell in Barking and Dagenham and what he's been doing in terms of support for local communities and artists at all, and creatives into workshops and spaces?
I can't say how off the top of my head though, but very.
He's the leader of the council there. I had an away day when I worked at Parliament with him and the MP I worked for. I'm a really big fan of his. He is from the area. He got galvanised into becoming a politician when the BNP were campaigning and it looked like they were going to win. He ended up a councillor. He's survived brain tumours, and he has now the leader of the council. He's quite something. And he has opened up art spaces and also work spaces that are set at criteria with fixed rents that are very low but slide depending on income. And he showed us around loads of spaces, including a cafe, but these workspaces have lots of glass, and he said so it's so the kids on the estate see the artists and the creatives and think, I can do that. Yeah. And that means that it's a sense of opportunity. Yeah. And you said that your spaces are open. How do you engage with those communities? Are there open days, or how do you factor that in?
Absolutely. I mean, with Fish Island Village, we're lucky in the sense that the first we've got people like Petty Plea and Sabina, and on the Sustainable Fashion Accelerator, Patrick McDowell, and these are people who, in their soul, they do that outreach as a kind of necessary action. So I think it's really like there's a human-centric design approach to how we create space. So it's again about positioning and how, like, not going into a reception where there's all these things that we're very considerate of. And luckily, again, with say Poplar Works, which Rahman's joining, obviously with Poplar Harker being an extremely caring developer in that world, it's about marrying those two things where the overall outcomes and outputs and intentions of all of the people that are involved at the top line are in unison, because I think oftentimes that's what we've seen in kind of development, especially in East London. There's this like, we need to make community from like big housing developers, and it's like you just want to kind of pat the creatives on the back and charge them £50 a square feet or something, and just say that's what it costs, whereas for us it's about making sure, again, someone can have a studio for a couple £100 a month, if that's where they're at, and if they need to take on a bigger space, we're here for them, but we're not pushing them towards that fate. So, and hopefully that kind of, that intention and that proposition kind of ekes into the local ecosystem.
Yeah, you definitely need to have a chat with Darren, because he also got what went wrong with Hackney, right? So Hackney had, for anyone who's younger than me, which would be all of you, Hackney was not to just put it into context, my grandparents lived in Dalston after the war. My grandfather was a policeman. That was his patch. And they lived on Shacklewell Lane. So it's not like I'm an outsider to the East End story at all. And actually my mother's family going back from Whitechapel. So Hackney back in the day had these artists that were squatting and then got housing co-ops. And then Ellingford Road, which was, friends of mine still lived there, was full of artists. They got their squats. And there were other squats that were given to people in the industry in the 80s. And that's all near Cordwainers, of course. So there was that exchange of cheap living. And then they got the right to buy, and then of course they could buy and then sell. And where creatives go is always attractive. I've always thought, if I was an estate agent, I'd follow where the artists are, because they make somewhere beautiful. They're full of gorgeous people, and what, the bankers are wise to it. Shoreditch now, as it was in the 90s, is very different. So what we have to be careful of, I think, is regeneration becoming the default setting of creativity, and then we all get priced out. But at the same time, there's something about inclusion, which means that everybody doesn't feel there's them and us. And it sounds to me like you're working on that. How long do people have a studio for with you generally?
So, I mean, in terms of so obviously some spaces are studios, some are desks. I mean, with desks, we do it like rolling. And then with studios, we ask for a minimum year from people. But again, that's purely from a kind of community standpoint, in the sense that this kind of cycle of people who just take a space for a couple of months and bail is not the kind of way to build kind of lasting effect in an area. But again, like I say, we have sliding scales, as you said, in terms of pricing. And we also, you know, if people want to downgrade in the middle of the lease, like when we accept that in terms of the trampoline, we just want to make sure that you're being sustainably and growing sustainably. And the amount of designers that come to me and say, I need 2,000 square feet. And it's like, they've got 3 collections, a couple of stockists. And I'm just like, yeah, I know you want that, but like, you're going to.
Don't we all?
We all, exactly. And I'm like, I would love to see that for you, but like, let's do that in a couple of years and let's like really work to that. And again, like, you know, the value of space now is very different, like space as a service, like looking at, you know, the kind of neighborhood store concept, which is like what all of our designers do now. You know, they have a studio, but it's also it's an event space, it's a fitting space, it's a repairing space. And I think for us now, creating kind of fashion studios, whatever that means, it very much reflects the kind of shift of the industry.
And do you see networks? I know Fashion District have been looking at this with the East London Fashion Cluster before. You're a part of that, aren't you, with Harker, I think. So yes. Is there a sense that you're saying to, say, Rahemur or Patrick or someone else, guess what, you're manufacturing, so that you can create localized hubs?
Yeah, so I mean, so obviously with Fish Island Village, we have actual manufacturing on site. So we have our own fabrication facility, which is available to them. As well as there are conversations with other partners to bring that on site. And then at Poplar Works, where Rahman is obviously the Making for Change and CFE. So it's about, yeah, but then also looking at other facilities, like at Fish Island Village, we have fashion photography already, and, you know, we'll look at modeling. And, you know, it's about that old garment district nature of being able to just pop out quickly around the corner versus sending your garments across town in plastic bags to get shot on models, sending it back. And it's, you know, as much as we can make that circular system happen inside of the wider fashion district is it's the overall aim, that's for sure.
That's really, really interesting. Thank you for that. Maria, I can see someone that just needs to come in. Thank you. And I'm sure we'll come back to you because I'm sure there's going to be questions. If you've got questions, if you could start typing them up. I know we've had one from Emma. Rahemur, the youth clubs. I want to know a bit more about that, please.
So the youth club involvement kind of started from a very young age. I was quite lucky to be one of those kids who actually got to go to a youth club and go to a good one. Because I'm not sure if anyone else is here from London, like a lot of the youth clubs are very crap. But they're like really awful. And it's literally just, it's very gendered as well. Like the boys would just do football in the back and there'll be a gym for the boys, and then the girls will have like their art club and they would do all the stuff. And then I was quite lucky, I found an art, like it was an art youth club, and everything was geared towards education. It was about career. It was about, you're not just having fun here, you're having fun for a purpose. And we, this was quite a few years ago. That was when Arts Award had just started. And then I saw how the second you like connect the two between education and youth clubs, you're suddenly changing lives. And like the whole cohort of students who used to come, we were all mixed bag from all the different state schools in Tower Hamlets. And like, I was just so in awe of what all the women did. Like, so it was all run by women, and I just like fell in love with everything that they did. And then so as I grew and as my career grew, I always used to go back to this youth club. I still screen print there. I still work with young people there, just because I really believe what they do. And that's really helped embed like how I speak to communities, how I do outreach. Because from the age of about 14 with this youth club, I was doing it. Like we would be like the star pupil lot who would go to a state school and like do like a workshop with like kids, and we're still kids ourselves. And I think that was really important about what that youth club did, which is something that I've taken on board, which is the outreach. It's like going out to somebody else's space to be like, hey, this is what I'm doing over here. Does it interest you? And like the one thing that I found really interesting was how different the conversations are between doing a workshop in a state school to doing stuff in a community. And I found like what works really well in the community is when you start speaking about history and where they're from and how deeply rooted they actually are to where they live. And I think that's what I found really interesting, especially in Tower Hamlets, being Bangladeshi and like speaking about all of these things to them. And then it just makes them relate and just see actually the Bangladesh community is so deeply embedded in Tower Hamlets, and it goes back many, many years. And then the one thing, actually, just to touch on something that Jodi said a long time ago about changing your voice, I want to say I did exactly the same thing. Like, if you meet any of my family, I think Tamara said, so I'm from the Isle of Dogs. It's proper, like, Millwall, hooligan, like, football area. That's what it was like when I was growing up. So my whole family, everyone speaks like East End geezers. And then I kind of changed my voice from being like luxury retail, all of this stuff, because I knew it sell. And like, I meet all my brothers and sisters, and none of them know how to pronounce T's, and like that, because it's just the way that they live. And every now and then I'll slip into it, and I find myself doing that deep, bad conditioning of just like, no, speak properly. And I'm still like, I think it's like a working class thing. Like,
also because the Cockney accent has changed, because the Cockney accent has taken on immigration. So it's now not so my grandfather, who was from Putney, had a really strong London accent of that era. It was, and now it's shifted again because of different communities coming in. You know, it's very shifted. So you're right, the Isle of Dogs. So I've got family on the Isle of Dogs who are Turkish, and yeah, first generation Turkish accent, second generation East End accent, but it's not the East End accent that I grew up with. It's a new East End accent, which has got a musicality to it in a different way. There is an argument that the East End is always where catchphrases come from. And I wonder if that's true. Definitely. I use some London sometimes, and Jodi's like, what? What have I taught you recently? I don't know. There was another one, and I break out in them sometimes. It's usually because I'm quite tired. The juggle of the homeschooling has definitely been an interesting one. And definitely I get more and more, all right, as the day goes on all levels. And I don't drink, otherwise I'd probably have a gin. Do you think that that when you go into the youth clubs or that experience, do you see a shift from hostility, or are they already engaged because they've got in? Because as Lena's pointed out, some people, particularly some girls from some backgrounds, aren't even allowed in.
Well, to be honest,
this
is what I think going to schools is so important, because the schools are safe spaces for a lot of parents. So they are already trusting of that school. So if you can go into an arts education thing and do a workshop with the art department, that child is already, she needs to go to that class. It just means it's going to be a different experience, because obviously we all know here that the current art education is not built for art in London. So we, like, a lot of the workshops that a lot of the secondary schools do is really important, because then it gives them a breath of fresh air into the education that they're having. It's like an outside point of view, just to show them it goes further than just you finishing your GCSE. If you want to follow this on, you can actually be successful. And I just remember growing up, like, everyone would always say, oh, don't do this career, you're never going to make money. I mean, it is hard. I'm not saying that it's not like it's easy, but you can, like, if you can make it. And I think a lot of people just don't know that you can. And
I also think we have to rephrase making it. I was interviewed for something, I've done a few interviews this week, and someone asked about success, and I think we have to reframe success from that last century model of the big the swimming pool, the jet, you know, the whole, to paying your bills, recalibrating, eating well, sleep, peace of mind as well as peace.
No, but I do think in this time now, especially with Corona, I think fashion is shifting towards more what you've just described. It's about the whole idea of being a fashion designer, I think, is changing. It's more going towards being sustainable. Can you pay your bills? Are you happy? Do you enjoy what you're doing? Is this too much for you? Like, all of those questions are now valid, whereas before you just had to keep running on that treadmill. You didn't really have a choice. Yeah. Now you have a choice.
So I first met you when you were showcased by Sarah Mower on when she was doing Sarah's List, which she obviously took to, and she had Richard, your friend Richard Malone, there when she went to Liberty. And I thought your photographs actually for your collection were really beautiful. You work with the community, and you cast that yourself?
Yeah, so for me, I think it's really important to always go back to the community aspect, just because it's so deeply embedded in me. Like, even when I did the showcase for London Fashion Week, just to be on the other side of Brick Lane where all the curry houses are was really important to me. And I think all of that is so deeply embedded into the brand that everything that I do, down to the casting, everything is considered, because it isn't that I'm like working extra hard to think about it. I'm just always thinking about those things because it's my lived experience. And that, I think, has always helped me.
But also, I think it's important because it goes back to the title. So I was called exotic, which really is like, yeah, my name, but it's also, it's true and it's not true, right? It's yes and it's no. And in a way that I think that's the perception towards the Bangladesh. From if the narrative of the sector is from essentially from an elite point of view, then exoticism is put onto people, but that's your lived experience living in an inner city in London, in Western Europe. You don't live in Bangladesh, right? I take it you were born here, and you're what, second, third generation. So it's your lived experience is that there's this blend and there's this mix, which is actually the DNA of the East End. So Brick Lane was the Huguenots, and then it was the Jewish community, and now it's the Bangladeshi community, and it will be something else soon, you know, as inevitably as they move up the estuary, which is why I think the conversation about what goes on into Enfield and out is really important, because actually that's where the mix really happens once, because people tend to stay, right, once they've got the garden and the big car. How do you work with Bangladesh? Because I know you've been doing a lot of work out there as well. How does that work for you?
So I've kind of got 2 projects in Bangladesh. So one of them is obviously my fashion brand. All of the textiles are made in Bangladesh with an ethical weaver. Everything's naturally dyed. I've worked really hard on trying to build this sustainable and ethical model of what I think it should be like, and it's working quite well. It's very slow, and that I enjoy. And then the other thing is I'm working on a documentary around the trans community in Bangladesh. So they're like 2 very different things. But I think for me, the reason why I go back is to really understand where my heritage actually comes from, and all of the textiles that we see, and especially for me, going to I know Leanne's here, going to the V&A and like seeing all the archive is really inspiring, but then to also see how it's exactly made, to the exacting of the wood block being exactly the same way many years ago, I felt was really important. And obviously, like, I'm not sure if a lot of people know, but like the Bangladeshi community in Tower Hamlets is predominantly Sylheti. And in Sylhet in Bangladesh, there's 2 big cities in Bangladesh. There's Dhaka and there's Sylhet. Dhaka's always seen as like the more educated, the more artsy, slightly, I don't know, just very relaxed and very liberal, and Sylhet's always very conservative, very Muslim, very strict. So the East London community here is very much like that. So then, yeah, that really...
So there's another layer to who came, right?
So yeah, the big push was because all the educated people in Dhaka were fine. They were educated, they had money, they were sustaining.
They stayed.
They stayed because they had no reason to live, to leave, because all the international schools were there. Diplomats would come in, like there's new money in Dhaka, but then the villages there isn't, so they had to go to other countries, and which is why there's a big community in Italy, there's a big Spanish community in Canada. Like, they reached out to make money, and understandably, to be honest.
That's very much mirrored in the Turkish community. I don't know that it is in some others, but in the Turkish community there's a big Alevi community, so they're not Muslim, and they're Kurdish Alevi, so they follow a Judaic Christian religion. And they're the guys, a lot of them, the guys running the shops are Alevi, so you'll see and they came from near my dad, where my dad came from, called Marash, in the 80s. They're refugees essentially from an oppression. My dad isn't from that background, so our Karen Bin said, I can't do her accent, so I'm not going to embarrass myself, said, your dad doesn't look like the guys in the shop. I said, no, because they're actually not. They're a different ethnicity. There's a different background. So it's like what happened. That's interesting. That the lens then of the host country is, oh, they're all like that.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, you go to Turkey, it's not like, it's very different. It's not that there's any less or more. It's just it's more. It's not one. It's multi. You know, there's a huge Jewish community that's been there because they were the Sephardic, and under the Ottomans they ended up going to Istanbul, and then through the empire, it was a big empire. You speak to anyone there and you'll find where their family were under the empire for hundreds of years, and they were all around. So it's kind of similar, that perception isn't always reality, it's much more layered. Do you see shifts in the community as they become 3rd, 4th generation in? Do you see a more shift into more people doing what you're doing and getting into the arts?
I mean, I am starting to see it now, and I think the more that you work in the community, you see there's like, because so I'm nearly 30 now, so a lot of people my age are starting to have kids, and the generation above me, like my sister's age, all of their kids are in the schools that I'm teaching, and I think I'm seeing that that child's thinking is very different to how mine was. And obviously their parents are a lot more open and they've integrated to society, they're educated. And I think that's where the success is where the parent is educated enough to understand that there's other opportunities. And if the parent is lacking and probably doesn't understand and doesn't have the reach, which is not their fault, it's the school's responsibility. And that's where the two kind of juggle, especially in communities where integration isn't really happening properly and there isn't a lot of access points to, well, bigger society.
And your film that your documentary that you're working on, when is that expected to?
So it's still in the development cut, so we're hoping probably like 2022. So currently we're actually fundraising for the Hijra community just because of COVID has hit them the worst. Like in Bangladesh, because they're trans, they're not even recognised as people, so they can't get anything, and no one's outside, so sex workers and that thing. So, but yeah, so initially it was 2021, but now it's gone back a year to 2022.
And who are you looking at to support you for funding?
Currently it's very open and we're still meeting with loads of different people, so if anybody has any connects to the film industry, thank you. But it's actually been okay. Like we've actually been very lucky and very I just see it as pure luck, and a lot of people have attracted themselves to the story and like the underlying issues that we're trying to like unpack, and the parallels to like our world is actually really close. And I think a lot of people can sympathize with what it feels like to be an outsider and how long it takes for someone who's an outsider with no privilege to be accepted. And I think it's kind of that story of like global, like
it's a universal theme, isn't it? The outsider, and in a way that's been the beauty of the sector is, I think fashion can be very alluring for outsiders. I've met many outsiders who found their community when maybe before they haven't, for lots of different reasons. Thank you. And if anyone wants to give ideas to Rahemur about funding for the for the film, or are you looking for more work with more schools? Any network?
So
or are you fully booked?
So if Corona wasn't a massive thing, there would have been a collection collaboration with a youth club. That is still going forward. I still got that project in mind. So I'm not open to other youth clubs. I'm still locking down this one because I've been working for a long time. It's they're called Streets of Growth, and they work with probably like the hardest youth group, which is the ones who are involved in gang crime. It's about trying to get them out and into something more creative, because the best way to make money is to work for yourself. And for someone who's young and who's like a hustler, who wants to make money quick, if you teach them a skill and show them actually there's people who will buy these things, you just got to make sure you're incredibly good at it and you're messing with it, can actually blow their mind. So I really want to just keep working on that project.
Thank you. Right, Jodi sent a message to everybody about our fundraising guy who's really chilled, and we'll share you his details after. Thank you, Rahman. You know, for me, you're a big part of the family, so thank you for coming on. And now Jodi. Right, before COVID happened, we were going to finally leave the environs of the M25 and go to Manchester, which I think would have been my second time ever, which is terrible, because my life always went on the Eurostar or that way, or back to Turkey or working. It didn't really go up and in the country. And we've talked about it a lot, but it's obviously difficult to get out at the moment. But what do you think it would mean if we could join the dots and get more engagement? Because I'm really worried about the London-centric nature of the sector. And we gathered all the data when we launched. And there is actually huge opportunities, and there are businesses. Obviously, Leicester is well known, and Northampton, but there are hubs of opportunity. We've got, I mean, Kate's on the call, who is in Liverpool working sustainably. There's lots of people, but it doesn't seem as focused on or get the attention. What do you think we need to do?
I think we need to get outside of London, which is why we were looking at. Which is why we were looking at, doing events in Manchester, Leeds, Newcastle, Liverpool, Edinburgh. And I think it's important because the outsider thing is that north-south divide, right? So M25, anyone beyond that doesn't matter to Londoners. That's not categorically true, but you know what I mean? That's how it's sort of viewed. And I think that actually, if you look at the quality of life, which is quite ironic in places, I'm not talking about everywhere, but say if I frequently look on Rightmove to check out where I could move back to, and I'm like, okay, I could move back to Newcastle in the poshest area ever and have like the best life. Do you know what I mean? And what does that mean? That kind of means that you feel that you have to come to London to make it, okay? Which is like everyone, right? You can make it in London, you can make it in New York, you know. And I think that needs to shift a little bit, because where we can, as someone suggested in the chat, you know, what would remote learning look like? Because it does come back to education again, because that's mainly why people move. That's what wanting to go back that frequently. And yes, I think we need to get out, and how we can get out now is something that the COVID's actually brought on, which is quite amazing, is actually we can get out still now, and even more so, you know, people can join us on this call from everywhere, whereas an event with Fashion Roundtable was in London, okay? So now we can have a lot more reach, different time zones, different areas. And I think also what's really important to me is that we look cross sector. We kind of remove the snobbery around brands and look at, you know, I'm not saying that perhaps the likes of Boo, who have done amazing things in their product and their company, but what they have done in Manchester is basically given loads of jobs. And they've also like created something that people want to be part of. Whether you agree with it or not is kind of not irrelevant, but actually you need to unpack why that's important in that area. Just because our aesthetics and our beliefs don't agree doesn't negate that it's actually a really important thing that's happened. So I think there needs to be the elitism thing bashed. It needs to be the snobbery around brands. We need to think about how we're going to do learning and what that looks like from an education perspective. So for example, the college I went to, we were told that only one person would get into St Martin's, and that we weren't allowed to submit or try and go for St Martin's because it would hamper this guy's will chance. So we didn't. So we put forward one person from our foundation. So that's what we did.
Gone on end. I'm so
but
angry.
We kind of knew it, that, and you just did that, and you just listened to what was told, because you knew that you wouldn't get 3 northern people into St Martin's, you'd get 1 from our college, and it had to be the best person who we thought was in line with them. And you did get in. You did, Will.
But you might have got in.
Would have not had an interview though, because we weren't put forward. So it's, you know, it's like that sort of stuff. So like, I'm kind of quite glad I didn't go to St Martin's in the end. But anyway, that's by the by. So yes, I think it starts from home. It starts from what you're taught with your parents. Like I said, my mum, I can knit because I sat in the shop with my mum, which was a haberdashery and knitting shop. I can knit, I can sew, I can pattern cut, all that sort of stuff. So from home right down to, you know, we were taught sewing in school, like we did home ed, we did textiles.
Did you have to make a Victoria sponge and draw a picture of it and write the ingredients?
Of course we did. Of course we did.
We were taught how to lay a tea tray for afternoon tea.
Taught to this day.
I was taught the gay Gordons. I can see Rahman. I was taught social dancing, and I can waltz.
Country dancing,
and the gay Gordons, which has been of use precisely once in my life, which was at my cousin's wedding, where randomly they had a Scottish band. I was still breastfeeding. I decided to squeeze myself into Yves Saint Laurent, and I was breastfeeding, and then the gay Gordons came on, and I got my cousin who came from Israel, Oren, who's 6'4", and I said, Oren, we need to do this. This is the only dance all night I'm going to know how to do. So what you're unpacking and what's being picked up as well is career.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk,
relevant.
When you have, so one of my big things is around like career advice. So when you have your one career chat of your life in your room, they're like, so what do you want to be then? Because you've got to decide your A-levels now. And you're like, okay, my things were like, I like sewing. I know that I could possibly get a job as a window dresser in a shop. I like creating stuff and making stuff with my hands. Maybe I can be a window dresser. Maybe I can like make clothes. Designer wasn't really a job to me at that point. Or I'm going to be a mounted section policewoman because I love horse riding. So that was kind of like my career choice.
Okay.
So yeah. And that was it. And I kind of went down that path, and I kind of did English because I thought we should. And then, you know, was crap at that because the way that it was taught and things like that. And then was great at business and great at art, you know.
So I'm unpacking what happened. I'm only just unpacking, and I'm 10 years older than you, what happened to me at school. And I'm realising the whole lens around race and class and aspiration and how you're layered. And actually today there's a WhatsApp group, they found me, which is not hard to do with my name, but they found me and they've put me on this WhatsApp group and I've muted it. And I want to ask them, because I'm the only one from my estate that wasn't kicked out for sixth form. And I was not put in groups. And I was told, no, you can't apply this year by the careers advice for A level. So I actually went to the local Watford one who told me what was going on. That's why I never went to the graduation, because I realised they were bullshitting me. And I watched a little bit of Becoming with Michelle Obama on Netflix this morning, last night. I haven't watched all of it. And she talks about being told she couldn't go to Princeton. And she was like, no, I'm going to Princeton. I'm going to Princeton. But it's very hard for people to find that inner resilience, because that's what we're talking about, and that inner belief, and have those networks where people go, you are going, you deserve it. And I remember I actually decided I was going for Oxford exams, and I got put into a group of people who were an option. And I met people who were really thick, and I met people at UCL who I thought, God, they're so thick. And my best friend worked in Boots growing up. And I knew she was cleverer than the people I met at university. And that's the lens that I see all of this through, is that the girl who goes to work in Boots might be a better leader of the country than the current leadership of the country, or leaders in business. And that's my value system. And if you're being told only one of you can go to St. Martin's because you're from the north, that's disgraceful. It's disgraceful. But it's because it's also propping up a system where he's then token, no one in the room's like him. He's excluded and an outsider. He's therefore converting his voice. He's therefore thinking, oh, I might go and work for high street rather than design, or no end of complications being added to the layers of what he has to go through and what all the rest of you have to go through. It's
a system, though. This is a thing. So what we're trying to do with Fashion Roundtable is ultimately change the system. So you have a choice of living in the system and in that slipstream, or you have to come out of it. And coming out of it's very difficult. So like you choose to change your voice or you don't, you know. And I think 20 years later now, it's quite a different landscape to work in fashion, because firstly, we've got fast fashion. That wasn't really a thing. So now you can have a job as a blogger or a, you know, someone working in a high street brand. So what does that mean? So that's a different landscape. And also you can create your own brand a lot easier than you could even 10 years ago because of Instagram. So it's kind of like opening up all these different things that we can do now. But that outsider and the elitism thing is still in existence, and people are still propping that up so that they can maintain that, so then they can still live within that stream. So it's kind of, I think now what we're learning as well is that we don't necessarily have to be in that. And I think it's something that Patrick Malone said, wasn't it? That he kind of said, Richard Malone, sorry, that he didn't want to work for like these big LVMH companies. Hey, Dukes. You know, so it's kind of, that's quite nice and it's so refreshing. And I kind of feel like the whole sustainability discussion, you can have this alternative discussion now, and it's kind of okay. And what I'm interested to see is how the alternative becomes more dominant, and how we, you know, they look to us for like tastemaker stuff and then pick it up and then run with it. And that's always happened. Creativity.
Happen, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
We have to trust that's going to happen. That's why the artists always lead where the estate agents follow. That's why the rave culture, now everything's got house music in, so, you know, or techno, which starts me going. We bought the Jeremy Deller, you know, print on a whim because it supports refuge. They've just finished the homework in the other room and there's a row going on, so I'm really sorry if there's a row going on. It's been one of those days. Yeah, I'm winning. I think what Leanne said, I know Leanne's furloughed, and I would have absolutely welcomed Leanne to be a part of this conversation, because to me she was so core of the support of us taking it to the V&A, and Rahemur was part of that. And I was so nervous when we went there. I remember I realised I had to write a speech, and I wrote it on the tube on the way there in a Tatum Jones dress, completely overdressed, as is my way. But you know, Leanne, like me, comes from a working class background, has gone into different establishments, and you constantly feel, and the work we're doing with representation and inclusion, I know that we've got more to do. I think there's a lifetime of work to do about unpacking this stuff, because whilst we all welcome the sense that as we grow older, we're shedding skins and we're realizing more about ourselves, and that's normal, right? That's completely natural. I think that the sense of class and racial snobbery that's being propounded at the moment and exacerbated by the mainstream media, it's time to unpack it and unravel it, because people keep getting the jobs that aren't fit for purpose, and I don't think it's working, and I don't think it's chic anymore. So I really feel that we have to unpack it, because I read the Daily Mail daily, and I'm literally sure that no other leader would get away with what's currently happening, where, oh, he's basically giving payola to a woman he's having an affair with when he's the mayor. Oh, but that's all right. Oh, he's getting a woman pregnant while his wife's having cervical cancer treatment. Oh, but that's all right. Oh, we're not quite sure about vote leave and the money. What? Like, unpack it. Like, why are we giving so much privilege to someone who doesn't have to sweat for it in the way that we do? And I think once we get there, we'll feel so much more proud of who we are and where we came from. The fact that it's not a big beautiful place that looks glorious on Instagram is fine. I keep going back actually to where I grew up, because they're knocking it down, and it's a real journey for me in terms of understanding that things are shifting, and people are being left behind in greater numbers. And if we don't have a duty of care, and what's really interesting about Rahemur and his generation and his cohort of designers is I really feel inspired by the sense of 1+1 on this, and I didn't see that in my generation, and I didn't see that so much in other generations of designers, where you've got Bethany working with women's refuges, we've got Richard Malone working completely, you know, in a very transparent way. You've got Patrick McDowell working with stuff, Tolu working with reusable denim, you know, extended life denim, and you working with the youth clubs and unpacking what it is to be from your multi-layered, multi-identity self, and working with that. I think it's really, really encouraging, because it allows all of us to see someone for our kids that we can identify with. I realise my son at the moment wants to be a Tottenham footballer and is dressed like one, but you know, hopefully that will pass.
He's a good boy. He's the man of my heart. He's a good boy.
That Patrick, his third name is Hotspur. Keeping it real. Keeping it real. He's Cosmo Duke Hotspur, Cincik Fusco. So yes, I got it in there just to wind up the mother-in-law, because I don't even understand football, and it worked. I think we need to end there. If you've got any questions, I know there were some questions about local. I feel we covered those. And I agree with Leanne, you know, the lack of understanding about people with income is something I'm very, very anxious about with why I personally want kids to go back to school, because I'm really worried about what's happening with attainment levels and support over the lockdown. I had a massive row with the mothers in the WhatsApp group for this North London area that I'm in on Monday about the lack of support and visual support, and I rang the school and I got the school on the phone, and I'm not a rep and I'm not a governor, and they've gone on today and there's videos, and the teacher rang, and there's engagement. There was no engagement. It was like, do this, do this, do this, and these kids are stuck in a world where we've had Brexit, climate change on news round every day, and now this. And we've got to understand, for them to want to be something, we've got to give them a world that they want to be a part of, right? Their world is digital. So I did rant, and I felt very uncomfortable doing it, but I urge all of you, especially if you've got kids and you're not happy with how they're being taught, tell the school, because I did, and they have shifted it. And I think it's brilliant what you're doing, Patrick. I'm definitely happy to help you hook up with Darren Rodwell, the guru of Dagenham, and Rahemur. I'm always so proud to have you. You're definitely part of the family.
Love being
and
here.
Jodi, the voice of the North, Cock of the North, as they call it, representing Newcastle, because it's important, right? We keep talking about lots of different issues, but unless we open up and and dismantle these paradigms, then we're going to stay with, it might be a more working class, multicultural vision, but it will still be a London-centric vision. And that's exactly why the Red Wall broke during the last election, because they weren't being communicated with. So I think it gives us lots of opportunities to shift. Same times next week for something else. I'm not quite sure which. Anybody, I know you've got the newsletter, I know you've got lots of things. And thank you all for coming on. And I would say I love you all, but I'd sound like I was singing in the Oscars or something. But have a lovely weekend, and thank you all so much for coming. Our newsletter's out on Tuesday. Do sign up if you haven't yet. If you haven't done our representation and inclusion paper survey, it takes about 5 minutes. Please do it, and please share it. We're trying to get the numbers up, and we are doing the next evidence session on the 28th. And Maria, who has given you her details, if not, they're very easy to find. It's maria.stoica@fashionroundtable.co.uk, or you can just email admin@fashionroundtable.co.uk and feed into that work, because that's the first work of its kind. There's lots of work going on around diversity, rightly so, but there's very little going on around our sector, and that needs to change. So I'm talked out. Thank you very much. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Rahemur. Thanks, Jodi.
Thank you everyone for coming.
See you guys.
Bye.
Hi Lena. Hi Leanne.
Bye, Lena. Bye. And love to Leanne. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye bye.